Book 3. The Council of the Ages.
Chapter 3, Part 2. The company of the Blue Phoenix spent a long time contemplating the plain of paradise. Its fame was fully deserved. That lush vegetation, the grass merged on the horizon with a blue sky full of cotton clouds as far as the eye could see. Along the plain, like drops of oil on a surface of water, clusters of tall trees appeared, where under their shade were built a series of beautifully designed houses. The breeze brought a scent of roses and mint that flooded everything. But they were not alone, they were waiting for them. There, as soon as they put the first hoof of their horses in Borderlania, an elf company on horseback was waiting for them. It was not just any company. It was the best knights of the Order of Ellen, who were waiting for their comrades in arms. The company was dressed in its best clothes and presented combat formation. Before their guests, they showed themselves with all their power as a warning. From among them approached the person who seemed to be in command of the company. The elf knight bowed to Ziranak. "There is Amhar in Rich. Womer." They spoke in High Elf. The common language was used by everyone in Sharnaries. It was supposed to be the language taught by the gods, with its variants and dialects, to all their children, although that does not mean that there are no other languages such as that of the elves, orcs or dwarfs. But it was usually discourteous not to speak together in the presence of foreigners. Although the group was already used to the continuous rudeness of the elves towards them. You didn't have to be a polyglot expert to know that the elf knight's name was Enrich, and a little knowledge of the elven royal dynasties of Sharnaries was enough to know that he was the youngest son of the king of Borderlania. Enrich observed the group of mercenaries, and despite possessing a beautiful look, mostly thanks to large slanted grey eyes, they could not hide the total contempt he had for all of them, but in particular for Aras, Damien, Ahitame, Syrian, Baban, all Embionic. The elf commented to his knights. Gosberg and Loranthas opened their eyes when they heard that. Aras, who was not exactly stupid, knew that those words were directed at him. Even Ziranak disapproved of the elf prince's words, though he remained silent. "It'll be troll shit," Denka grumbled. Enrich heard that, who turned to look at the Denka. The situation was beginning to get tense again. Many put their hands to the hilts of their weapons. Arian grabbed Aras' hand so that she would not draw her sword. "Enrich is enough," Ziranak ordered. "We have orders that we are going to carry out." The call to order from the first knight of the Order of Ellen calmed things down, and after a pause the group began to ride again. Resuming the march caused a drop in tension. The mercenaries should keep calm in this place. After a long time of walking, Arian managed to get to Gosberg's side. What did the elf say? He tried to speak in the lowest tone he could. The Denka smiled slightly and looked at the priestess with some condescension. They already had the father's head, now they could have the son's. Arian was perplexed. She did not expect such great contempt, and she got angry. "I should have killed him right then and there," the Denka muttered. They continued the march. Aras was not someone who was well received in Borderlania. He was one of the architects of the fall of the kingdom of Tortanel at the hands of the Black Empire, the most disastrous news for the elves in the entire Age of the Damned. Surely in Borderlania, there were many refugees from the ancient elven kingdom of Darsuk. Aras didn't expect a different reaction either, as they had sacked Tortanel to the ground to make it an imperial province. But the elves took their revenge the following year, at the Battle of the Gorge of Teoras, slaughtering the Black Legions and carrying the head of their father, Arakabaras, to be hung inside the throne room of the great king of Bordalania until it rotted completely. So the presence of Aras was already an element of tension for everyone, and the fact that he came along with his orc cousins. Even Agnorok, who was not so attached to orc traditions, was also quite upset. Everyone knew the story well. There had been no presence of orcs on the plains of Paradise for a long time. Since they were expelled at the conclusion of the Shadow Wars, when they were defeated by the elves. The orcs were massacred, fled desperately, and had to seek a new accommodation in the south. On a new continent, Darsuk, they found a new home in the Golden Plains, where they spent ages constantly fighting men and elves to survive. With the rarefied atmosphere, they advanced in silence through the plain of Paradise. Occasionally a bridge had to be circumvented. They crossed lush fruit fields and richly decorated farmland. The elves tilled the land without making any apparent effort. At the end of the plain, located on the horizon, the greatest work of all mercenaries could be seen, the Palace of the Heavens. Its great golden dome received them while the great waterfall fell into it. Ariant had read a lot about the place, but now when he saw it in person he saw that no description or drawing did it justice. No one alive in mercenaries could build it, not even the best elven and dwarven craftsmen. It was a construction made by the gods, the most perfect construction that had ever been created. The company that was escorting them abandoned them when they arrived at the Palace of Heaven, which was a huge structure. The palace was the size of a city. The entrance to the palace was protected by a huge wall of golden stones. Agnorok was surprised. Bordalania was located in the middle of the continent, surrounded by allied kingdoms, with no enemies nearby. However, he had a powerful army and the Palace of Heaven was jealously guarded, as if an imminent threat was going to attack them. They were the center of attention of all those present from the beginning. Only Enrich and Ziranak accompanied them apart from a small crew of elven knights. They advanced through the interior of the palace. The numerous gardens inside the palace stood out. They were beautiful and lush, full of trees, and each garden could be considered the size of a forest. They did not go up or down any floor. They advanced through the main gallery of the Palace of Heaven. They were closer and closer to the dome and the waterfall. The area surrounding the dome was filled with statues of great elven kings that protected the entire avenue. Anyone who had read about the Palace of the Heavens would know how to recognize it without difficulty. It was the Avenue of the Kings. Each king of Bordalania had a statue in his honor. The avenue welcomed them with a statue of the current king, a Mistral 18. Although the elves were long-lived, the avenue was full of statues with streets that started from the main avenue. On this street the most important kings in the history of Bordalania were placed. The composition of the statues that decorated this avenue could depend on the king's criteria. What was never changed was the last statue, the first king of Bordalania, the great god Label, the creator of mercenaries. Label was the father of Elaban, Thani, and the other gods. And although everyone knew of his existence, for many of the mercenaries it was the first representation they saw of the great god. Since during the Age of the Damned, most of the original gods were forgotten, but not to the inhabitants of Bordalania, who considered themselves the favorite sons of Label, the protectors of mercenaries. They stood for a moment admiring the statue of the great god. He was powerful and staring blankly at the horizon. They resumed their journey to enter the interior of the dome. They called it the Room of Creation. It was immense, with the waterfall in the background, falling behind the throne. The room was full of people. There were great gentlemen present. The Council of Ages was assembled, which might explain the great security in the kingdom. They were greeted with absolute silence, only interrupted by the noise of the waterfall falling water. They walked and walked. Time seemed to stop. It became an eternity. In the end they reached the throne. The image they found could not be more curious. The great king was sitting on the throne. But even though the great king was quite tall, the titanic dimensions of the throne made him look like a small child sitting on a chair. The throne was so huge that even for someone as great as Sabu, it would fit comfortably. Kush proved that what the legends and myths said about the gods was true. They were true giants.